Today I've come back to Miltonrigg Woods again. I think this is now my third recent visit here, and the aim is to try and get to that last portion of the woods where I had to walk through because of the weather last time, to go back there and try and see what images I can get. Yesterday I had a delivery. It was what they call the Thrift Nifty 50, which is basically the 50mm lens but the budget version, and it's really quite a popular lens for most cameras because it's the standard sort of like eye viewpoint that everybody goes to. I now have in my bag 5 prime lenses plus 3 zoom lenses. The 3 zoom lenses probably actually cover all of the prime lenses apart from my 16mm. So the prime lenses are 16, 35, now the Thrifty 50, 85 and the 100mm macro that I usually go to for macro images. So I thought I'd do this walk today as something a little bit different, in that I will challenge myself to see if I can use each of those lenses. Now the question you may be asking is, why use prime lenses when you can easily cover everything with a zoom? And there's probably 2 answers to that question. One is that especially more on the non-professional lenses, the ones where you are paying silly money for, a prime lens will often be better than the zoom equivalent, purely and simply because the whole lens is developed around that focal length size, whereas when you consider a zoom lens has got to cover a whole range of a focal length. So for example, my 24-105 has got to cover sharpness from being a 24mm lens all the way through to 105. And it's not just about then where the sharpness is, it's also about what happens when you open or close the aperture. So there's a whole lot of development built into creating a zoom lens compared to a prime lens. Now the other thing as well is that I think a prime lens makes you think more about your image. If you only ever use a zoom lens, just ask yourself this: when you take that image, could you actually move yourself forwards or backwards from the subject to get at a specific focal length? Now it might be that you have, say, something like the 24-105mm lens on, and you're stood a certain distance from a subject and you think, well, okay, I'll zoom in on that and get that a little bit closer in the frame. What you'll probably find is that just taking 2 or 3 steps closer to the subject is that you get exactly the same image, but at the focal length that you've got. So I've just wandered through some of the woods so far. I've seen a few foxgloves about, and they've not really sort of been in a position where I've found them favourable. But I've come across, I suppose this is holly. I mean, hopefully you can see we've had some rain showers this morning, so it's all got natural water on it. And I've been hunting around this plant here looking for what I think is the best possible situation for an image. And I come across this one leaf here. It's pointing upwards, and I just think by using my first prime lens here, the 85mm, keeping the angle fairly low so that this leaf is fairly straight on, of taking the image, concentrating on this small leaf. I've opened the aperture up to its widest with this lens, which is f2. So hopefully what I'll find is that it's only the leaf in focus and everything else will be out of focus. And I will try a few different aperture settings. That's the 85mm ticked off. When I last came to the woods here, probably 3 weeks ago, these rhododendrons were everywhere and really big bright flowers in their prime. This particular plant is probably the best one I've found so far, and you can see on the ground there's a lot of these leaves all dropping off everywhere, and they are getting past their best. I think these just show what happens with nature and gives us different opportunities. 3 weeks and it's almost as if the flowering season for the rhododendrons was over in these woods, and it means you move on to a different stage and other plants appear. So I want to capture one of these where the it's gone past its best and it's started to deteriorate. And here's where I've now gone for the 16mm lens. So I've really hiked my tripod up in a really sort of odd position to get a nice stable position to get the same image every time. And I've got this plant here where the majority of the flowers on the top here look quite nice, and on the bottoms they're really going sort of like gone past their best. And you can see further up as well, they're all the same there as well. And there's another one especially at the top there. I've gone for a portrait view in this particular one, purely and simply because I wanted to get this front flower in focus and have all the others in the background where they are out of focus. And once again, I've used a whole wide range of apertures from f2 right away up to f11 to see how the image sort of changes. And again, it's a personal preference. I think from what I'm seeing from the camera itself, I'm probably going to be looking at around about f4, f5.6, because it just keeps enough of the front flower in focus and puts everything else in the background out of focus, so you get that nice pink colour all in the back of the image for where all the other flowers are. So that's lens number 2 ticked off. Last time I was here, I was walking out this way on the way back to the car, and I just briefly spotted this tree. And hopefully you can see from what I'm seeing here is that the way this branch is coming out here, it almost looks like a trunk of an elephant, and you've got the 2 legs down the front there. So I've tried a couple of 3 different images here. Firstly, shooting on, looking at like this way from the front, just cropping out some of this branch here in like a landscape format. And I've now come round to the side here, and I've tried the same image again in that landscape format, but I think the real powerful one is having the camera in portrait mode, literally just concentrating on what would be like the elephant's front legs and a really oversized thick trunk coming out the front. So this is lens number 3 ticked off, because I've actually used my nifty Thrifty 50 on this one, and I've taken really probably 2 apertures on this one to see what it's like. Took one at f8 to try and make sure I get the what I'm calling the elephant tree in focus, but I've also opened up the lens to its widest at 1.8, and that's given a really different viewpoint, and I think I actually prefer that one. So I've got to say, really pleased with this lens for the image that I got. So that's 3 lenses down out of the 5. So I've now got the 35mm to go and the 100 macro. Not walked very far down the track and come across another subject for lens number 4, this time the 35mm. And I spotted these buttercups on the side here, but I'd really like sort of like the pathway going up there as well. I was contemplating on how I can produce this as an image, but I thought, right, I'll have the whole background as a blur and get close into these buttercups, well in particular just the one. So the good thing about the 35mm lens is that you can really get close to your subject. So I have literally got almost as close as I possibly can, and trying to make sure I include the other one just for a bit of colour in the background. Got these grasses here as well, which I quite like as well, and then everything else pretty much blurred out. That's number 4 ticked off. Last lens is the 100mm macro, so I will have a look to see whether I use it as a macro lens or as an ordinary 100mm lens as I go around a little bit further. Now the final lens, the 100mm macro, I am actually going to macro, and I've literally stayed where I was. There's the buttercups where I got with the 35mm lens. I've noticed something when I've been walking through the woods here quite a bit, and it's not just this time, has been on previous times as well. I often see, I don't know how well it shows on here, these white pieces, usually on grasses. And I initially thought, I mean, there's some there, they are literally all along here. There's quite a few in places where I find them. So there's another one there, another really odd shaped one there, more down in there and there. They're all over the place, and I initially thought there was some form of an insect or an animal or something, whether it's something that's metamorphing into a different part of its life. So I thought, you know, it's almost a bit like a caterpillar when it sort of goes into a cocoon, and they often come out in these really fluffy things before they eventually come out as a butterfly or a moth. But it's, again, this is something I love about the macro world. It's not until you actually look close, and I've just set up on this one under here because it's out of the wind, that you really see what they are. They're actually just a mass of white bubbles. What's actually causing that, I have no idea whatsoever. I will try and do a bit of Googling and see if I can find out what it is. Just done a bit of Googling on what that might be, and it's called cuckoo spit, and it's nothing to do with the bird, the cuckoo. It basically comes from a nymph called a froghopper or a spittlebug, and these nymphs appear between May and July, and it's basically the secretion, the bubbles that they have for where they're drawing sap out of the plant. So that's answered that one. Haven't actually seen the nymph themselves, I've only seen all these large white bubbles, so I'm guessing the nymph is probably inside the bubble somewhere. Just come back to the first cuckoo spit that I was originally trying to photograph, and had a really close look at these, and the one next to it, I'm not sure whether it's actually the spittlebug or not, but at the top of the bubbles there are sort of like various, looks like nymphs or very small insects or something on there anyway, and it's really hard to see on this because the wind is blowing so much. It's just really hard to get a really clear image, but I have just done a little video on that, so hopefully you'll see what's there. Now whether that's just the individual nymph at the top there, or whether it's multiple or other dead insects in there, I really don't know. If anybody knows much about these, then please do leave comments below. Well, I think that's challenge complete. I've hopefully got reasonable images from each of the prime lenses. So that's from the 16, the 35, the 50, the 85 and the 100. And what have I got from today? Sometimes setting yourself a challenge for when you go out, I think makes you hunt for different things. You don't always just come out looking for necessarily one thing. For example, I mean, because I wanted to use all the prime lenses, and it's quite a focal range from 16 right up to 100, all the different subject matters probably were going to be so different. I'm fortunate really that most of those lenses have really good close focal distance, so it meant I could almost go to macro distances from subjects to actually get those images. And that worked both ways, because with the wide angle lens like the 16 and the 35, I could get so close to a subject even though it's not necessarily big in the frame, and it just added to the image. Whereas I think generally a lot of people, when they pick up a wide angle lens, whether it be 16, 35, something like that, will take a straightforward image, a bit like I've got here, something big and open. And there's nothing wrong with that, it works. Photography really is a form of an art, and us as humans, we all have our preferences. I think it's a bit like music. Music is another art form, and we all have different tastes in music. Some will like classical, some will like pop, some will like rock, some will like jazz. But there will certainly be elements of music that you don't like. Having this challenge in particular made it so that I had more of an open mind of the subjects I was looking for. I knew that I could go for the macro with the 100mm and get a true macro one-to-one on the actual image. Having the other lenses, which even though give me close focus and distances, they're not true macro lenses in that they give me a one-to-one magnification. The Nifty 50, really pleased I bought it, and just using it on that, what I call the elephant tree, I think worked really, really well. And I did post on social media when I got the lens my collection of prime lenses, and somebody's comment was, well, you don't need the 50mm, 35mm will do everything it does, and it's probably a better lens. It may well be a better lens, but that angle of view gives a different perspective. So there really is no best lens for anything really. Every lens has its place, and multiple lenses can do the same subject but in different ways, and those ways are down to your own personal preference. Now, whether you do your photography to try and please others, to get likes or marks in a competition, is entirely up to you. But if you take images for yourself, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of those images. If you're happy with that image, then that's a good image. Hopefully this video has been an interest to you. It's certainly been a nice project to do, and thanks a lot for watching. Oh shit! Ah! That's me slid down.